The rain came down in sheets that September evening in 1878, turning the dusty streets of Stockton, California into rivers of mud, and Xavier Dalton was halfway through his ride home when he saw her collapsed against the side of the general store, her body shaking with sobs that matched the rhythm of the storm. He pulled his horse to a stop, water streaming from the brim of his hat, and took in the sight of the young woman who looked like she had been through hell and back, her dress torn at the hem, her dark hair plastered to her face, and her arms wrapped around herself, as if she could hold the pieces of herself together through sheer will alone. Xavier was not the kind of man who could ride past someone in need, not when his ranch sat just 3 miles outside of town, with more rooms than one bachelor needed, and certainly not when this woman looked like she might not survive another hour in this downpour. He dismounted and approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. And when he got close enough to see her face properly, he was struck by how young she was, probably no more than 20 or 21, with features that would have been beautiful if they were not currently twisted in despair. "Miss," he called out over the sound of the rain, keeping his voice gentle and his hands visible, "you cannot stay out here. You will catch your death." She looked up at him with eyes that were so filled with fear and exhaustion that he felt something shift in his chest, something protective and fierce that he had not felt in all his 26 years of living. "I have nowhere to go," she said, her voice barely audible over the storm. And there was such defeat in those 5 words that Xavier made his decision without another moment's hesitation. "You do now," he said, extending his hand to her. "My name is Xavier Dalton, and I have a ranch just outside of town. I can offer you a room, a hot meal, and a place to dry off. No strings attached, just basic human decency." She stared at his hand for a long moment, and he could see the war playing out behind her eyes, the fear of trusting a stranger battling against the desperation of her current situation. Finally, she placed her small, cold hand in his, and he helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed from what he suspected was a combination of cold and hunger. "Rebecca," she said softly. "Rebecca Anderson." Xavier helped Rebecca onto his horse, then swung up behind her, keeping one arm around her waist to hold her steady as they rode through the storm toward his ranch. She was shivering so violently that he could feel it through his own soaked clothes, and he urged his horse faster, worried about how much exposure she had already endured. The ride felt longer than usual, each minute stretching out as he felt her growing weaker against him, her head eventually coming to rest against his chest, as if she no longer had the strength to hold it up. When they finally reached the ranch house, Xavier wasted no time getting her inside, calling out for his housekeeper, Maria, who had worked for his family since before Xavier was born and now stayed on to help him manage the household. The older woman appeared from the kitchen, her eyes widening at the sight of the bedraggled young woman Xavier was supporting. "Dios mío!" Maria breathed, immediately taking charge in the way she always did. "Bring her to the guest room upstairs. I will heat water for a bath and prepare some soup." Xavier was grateful for Maria's presence, for the way she moved through the house with purpose and efficiency, because he found himself feeling strangely unsteady as he guided Rebecca up the stairs to the room that overlooked the eastern pasture. The guest room was simply furnished, but comfortable, with a large bed covered in a handmade quilt, a dresser, a washstand, and a window with blue curtains that Rebecca would be able to appreciate once the storm passed. Xavier helped her sit on the edge of the bed, and she looked around the room with an expression of disbelief, as if she could not quite process that she was somewhere safe and dry after whatever ordeal had brought her to that storefront. "Thank you," she whispered, and her voice cracked on the words. "I do not know why you are helping me, but thank you." Xavier crouched down so he was at her eye level, noting the bruises on her wrists that were just becoming visible now that they were in better light. "You do not need to thank me for doing what any decent person would do," he said firmly. "Maria is preparing a hot bath and some food. Once you are warm and fed, you can rest and we can talk about everything else tomorrow." He wanted to ask her what had happened, who had hurt her, and why she had been alone in the rain with nowhere to go, but he could see that she was hanging on by a thread, and pressing her for answers now would be cruel. Maria appeared with an armful of towels and one of her own nightgowns, which would be far too big for Rebecca, but would serve until they could arrange something better. "Come, child," Maria said gently, switching to the maternal tone that Xavier remembered from his own childhood. "Let us get you into some dry clothes and warmed up." Xavier left them to it, heading to his own room to change out of his wet clothes, but he found his thoughts circling back to Rebecca, to the fear in her eyes, and the way she had looked at his offered hand like it might be a trap. He changed into dry clothes and made his way down to the kitchen, where he stoked the fire and set about making coffee, needing something to do with his hands while he waited. The rain continued to pound against the windows, and thunder rolled across the valley, the kind of late summer storm that would be good for the land, but made traveling treacherous. He thought about what might have happened if he had not been riding through town at that exact moment, if he had decided to wait out the storm at the saloon instead of heading home, and the image of Rebecca alone in the rain filled him with a cold anger directed at whoever had put her in that position. Maria came downstairs an hour later, her expression troubled. "She has bathed and eaten a little soup, though not as much as I would like," the housekeeper reported. "She has bruises, Xavier, on her wrists and arms. Someone has hurt that girl." Xavier's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists at his sides, but he kept his voice level when he spoke. "Did she say what happened?" "No, she barely spoke at all, just thanked me over and over as if she could not believe simple kindness. She is asleep now, exhausted. I will check on her through the night to make sure she does not develop a fever from the cold." Maria fixed Xavier with a look that he knew well, the one that said she was about to give him advice whether he wanted it or not. "That girl has been through something terrible. She will need time and patience, not questions and pressure." "I know," Xavier said quietly. "I just want to help her." "You already have," Maria replied, her expression softening. "You brought her somewhere safe. That is more than most would do." She patted his arm and headed back upstairs, leaving Xavier alone with his coffee and his thoughts. He did not sleep well that night, finding himself getting up multiple times to check that the house was secure, that no one could come looking for Rebecca and find her here. It was irrational, perhaps, since he did not even know her story yet, but the protective instinct that had sparked when he first saw her had only grown stronger over the course of the evening. When dawn finally broke, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and glistening, and Xavier went about his morning chores with half his attention on the house, wondering when Rebecca would wake. She appeared in the kitchen doorway around mid-morning, wearing Maria's nightgown with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her dark hair falling loose around her face. In the daylight, Xavier could see that she was indeed beautiful, with delicate features and dark blue eyes that were currently filled with uncertainty. "I am sorry," she said immediately. "I did not mean to impose on your hospitality for so long. I should go." "You should sit down and have some breakfast," Xavier countered, pulling out a chair at the kitchen table. "And you are not imposing. You are welcome to stay as long as you need." He could see the protest forming on her lips, so he added, "Please, at least have some coffee and tell me what brought you to Stockton." Rebecca hesitated, then moved to the chair and sat down carefully, as if she expected it to be pulled out from under her. Maria appeared with a plate of eggs, bacon, and fresh bread, setting it in front of Rebecca with a warm smile that seemed to crack something in the younger woman's carefully held composure. "You are both so kind," Rebecca said, her voice thick with emotion. "I do not deserve this." "Everyone deserves basic kindness and safety," Xavier said, pouring her a cup of coffee and sliding it across the table. "You do not have to tell me anything you are not ready to share, but I want you to know that you are safe here. No one is going to hurt you." He watched as she took a small sip of the coffee, her hands trembling slightly around the cup, and he found himself wanting to know everything about her, wanting to understand what had brought such a vibrant young woman to such a desperate place. Rebecca ate slowly, and Xavier could tell she was trying to figure out what to say, how much to reveal. Finally, she set down her fork and met his eyes, and he saw a flash of determination there that made him think she was stronger than her current circumstances suggested. "I came to Stockton 3 weeks ago with a man I thought I was going to marry," she began, her voice steady despite the way her hands were shaking. "His name was Thomas, and we met in Sacramento where I was working as a seamstress. He told me he owned a business here, that he could give me a good life, and I believed him because I wanted so desperately to believe that someone could love me." Xavier felt his chest tighten at the pain in her voice, but he stayed quiet, letting her tell her story at her own pace. "When we got here, I found out that the business he owned was a gambling hall, and the good life he promised involved me working there as a hostess, entertaining men and encouraging them to spend their money. When I refused, when I told him that was not what I had agreed to, he became angry. He said I owed him for the trip here, for the room he had been providing, for the clothes he had bought me. He said I would work off my debt one way or another. Rebecca's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Last night, I tried to leave. I packed what little I had and waited until he was busy with the evening crowd, but he caught me at the door. We fought, and he grabbed my wrists so hard I thought he might break them. He told me I was not going anywhere, that I belonged to him now. Xavier's hands clenched into fists under the table, rage coursing through him at the thought of anyone treating Rebecca that way, at the casual cruelty of a man who would manipulate a woman's hopes and trap her in such a situation. "How did you get away?" he asked, his voice tight with the effort of controlling his anger. One of the other girls, Martha, she created a distraction. She knocked over a table of drinks and started screaming at one of the customers, and in the chaos, I ran. I did not have time to grab my things. I just ran out into the rain and kept running until I could not run anymore. I ended up at that storefront, and I honestly did not know what I was going to do next. I had no money, no possessions, nowhere to go. I thought maybe I should just go back, that maybe dealing with Thomas was better than dying in the street. Tears were streaming down her face now, but she did not seem to notice them. And then you found me. Xavier reached across the table and gently took her hand, careful of the bruises on her wrist. "I am glad I found you," he said firmly. "And you are never going back there. You can stay here as long as you need to figure out your next step. I will not let anyone hurt you again." He meant every word, felt the promise settle into his bones, like something fundamental and unbreakable. Rebecca looked at him with wonder and confusion. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do this for a stranger? What do you want from me?" "I do not want anything from you, except for you to feel safe and have the chance to heal from what you have been through," Xavier said honestly. "My parents raised me to help people when I could, to use what I have been given to make things better for others. This ranch has more space than I need, and you need a place to stay. It is as simple as that." It was not entirely as simple as that, because Xavier was beginning to realize that his feelings about Rebecca were already more complicated than simple charity. But he was not about to burden her with that when she was still recovering from one man's manipulation. Maria returned to the kitchen and took in the scene with her knowing eyes, the way Xavier was holding Rebecca's hand and the tears on the younger woman's face. "You will stay with us," Maria announced in a tone that brooked no argument. "We will get you some proper clothes, and you will rest until you have your strength back. Then we will figure out what comes next." She looked at Xavier. "I assume you will be speaking with the sheriff about this Thomas person?" "I will," Xavier confirmed, already planning the trip into town. "But first, I want to make sure Rebecca is settled and feels secure here." He turned back to Rebecca. "Do you think Thomas will come looking for you?" Rebecca bit her lip, worry clouding her features. "I do not know. He was very angry. But he also has a business to run. He might just write me off as a loss and find another girl to manipulate. I hope he does not come here. I do not want to bring trouble to you after you have been so kind." "You are not bringing trouble," Xavier said firmly. "Thomas is the one who created this situation, not you. If he comes here, he will deal with me, and I can promise you that will not go well for him." He saw Maria nod approvingly, and some of the tension in Rebecca's shoulders eased slightly. They spent the rest of the morning helping Rebecca settle in, with Maria finding some dresses that had belonged to Xavier's mother and altering them to fit Rebecca's smaller frame. Xavier tried to focus on his ranch work, checking on the cattle and meeting with his ranch hands about the coming week's tasks, but he found his thoughts constantly drifting back to the house, to Rebecca, and whether she was all right. He had never felt this way before, this intense need to protect someone, to make sure they were safe and happy. When he returned to the house for the midday meal, he found Rebecca sitting in the parlor with a book, looking more rested than she had that morning. She had changed into one of the altered dresses, a simple blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes, and her hair was pulled back in a loose braid. She looked up when he entered, and a small smile crossed her face, the first real smile he had seen from her. "Maria said you have quite the collection of books," Rebecca said, holding up the volume she had been reading. "I hope you do not mind that I borrowed this one. It has been a long time since I had the leisure to read." "I do not mind at all," Xavier said, pleased that she felt comfortable enough to make herself at home. "My mother loved to read, and she made sure I developed the habit as well. Feel free to read any of them." He settled into the chair across from her, suddenly aware that he still smelled like horses and leather from his morning work. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Rebecca admitted. "Still a bit overwhelmed by your generosity, but better. I keep expecting to wake up and find This is all a dream, that I am still standing in the rain with nowhere to go." She set the book aside and looked at him with those expressive blue eyes. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why do you live here alone? A ranch this size must require a lot of work, and you seem like the kind of man who would have a family." There was no flirtation in her question, just genuine curiosity, and Xavier appreciated her directness. "My parents died 2 years ago," he explained, the old grief still present but no longer as sharp as it once was. "There was a fever that went through the area, and they both caught it. I inherited the ranch, and I have been running it ever since with the help of Maria and my ranch hands. As for a family, I have not met anyone I wanted to build that kind of life with. Not yet, anyway." He held her gaze as he said the last part, and he saw something flicker in her eyes before she looked away. "I am sorry about your parents," Rebecca said softly. "They must have been wonderful people to raise a son like you." "They were," Xavier agreed. "They would have liked you, I think, my mother especially. She was always bringing home strays, people who needed help or a place to stay. She used to say that we were blessed with abundance so we could share it with others." He smiled at the memory. "I think she would approve of me bringing you here." They talked through lunch, the conversation flowing more easily, as Rebecca began to relax and open up. She told him about her childhood in a small town outside of Sacramento, about losing her parents to cholera when she was 16 and having to make her own way in the world. She spoke of her work as a seamstress, the long hours and small pay, and how Thomas had seemed like an answer to her prayers when he had first courted her. Xavier found himself drawn in by her stories, by the resilience and humor she showed, despite everything she had been through. The afternoon passed with Xavier working on ranch accounts while Rebecca read, a comfortable domestic scene that felt surprisingly natural. When evening came, Maria prepared a roast chicken dinner, and the three of them sat around the table like a family, sharing the day's events and discussing plans for the coming week. Xavier noticed how Rebecca seemed to bloom in this environment, how the fear and desperation from the previous night were gradually being replaced by something softer and more hopeful. After dinner, Xavier excused himself to ride into town, wanting to speak with the sheriff before it got too late. Rebecca grabbed his arm as he was heading out, her eyes wide with concern. "Please be careful," she said. "I do not want you getting hurt because of me." "I will be fine," Xavier assured her, covering her hand with his. "I just want to make sure the sheriff knows what happened, so if Thomas does come looking for you, there is already a record of his behavior." He could feel the warmth of her hand through his sleeve, and he was reluctant to pull away, but he forced himself to step back. "I will be back in a few hours." The ride into Stockton gave Xavier time to think about the situation and about his growing feelings for Rebecca. He knew it was too soon, that she was vulnerable and recovering from a traumatic experience, but he could not deny the pull he felt toward her. There was something about her spirit, her determination to survive and find hope even in the darkest circumstances, that called to something deep in his soul. He needed to be careful, to give her space and time to heal without pressuring her, or making her feel like his help came with expectations. Sheriff Coleman was in his office when Xavier arrived, a grizzled man in his 50s who had been keeping the peace in Stockton for nearly 2 decades. Xavier explained the situation, watching as the sheriff's expression darkened with anger. "I know the man you are talking about," Coleman said grimly. "Thomas Garrett. He runs the Silver Star Gambling Hall, and we have had complaints about his business practices before, but nothing we could make stick. If what this girl says is true, and I have no reason to doubt it based on your character, then he has finally crossed the line." "What can be done about it?" Xavier asked. "I will go have a conversation with him, make it clear that if he comes near Miss Anderson again, he will be facing charges for assault and attempted imprisonment. That should be enough to make him think twice, especially since he is a businessman who relies on maintaining at least a veneer of respectability." The sheriff leaned back in his chair. "You did a good thing, bringing her to your ranch. She is lucky you were there." "I think I might be the lucky one," Xavier said quietly, and the sheriff gave him a knowing look. "Like that, is it?" "It is too soon to say," Xavier replied, but he could feel the heat in his face. "Right now, I just want to make sure she is safe and has the space to figure out what she wants to do next." "You are a good man, Xavier Dalton," the sheriff said. "Your parents would be proud." They talked for a few more minutes about the situation, and then Xavier rode back to the ranch, relieved that the law was now aware of the situation and would be keeping an eye on Thomas Garrett. When he got back to the ranch, he found Rebecca and Maria in the parlor, working on some embroidery together. Rebecca looked up when he entered, relief flooding her features. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Everything is fine," Xavier confirmed, settling into a chair near the fire. "The sheriff is aware of the situation and is going to have a talk with Thomas. He does not think there will be any more trouble." He watched as some of the tension left Rebecca's body, her shoulders relaxing as she bent back over her embroidery. The days that followed fell into a comfortable pattern. Xavier would rise early to handle the ranch work, return for meals that Maria prepared with Rebecca's increasingly skilled help, and spend the evenings talking with Rebecca in the parlor or showing her around the ranch. She was fascinated by everything, asking endless questions about the cattle, the horses, the land itself, and Xavier found himself seeing his home through her eyes, appreciating it in new ways. Rebecca began to help more around the house, insisting that she needed to earn her keep, despite both Xavier and Maria telling her that was not necessary. She threw herself into learning how to cook the dishes Maria specialized in, how to tend the vegetable garden, how to care for the chickens that provided their eggs. Xavier would watch her from a distance sometimes, noting the way the sun brought out red highlights in her dark hair, the way her laugh rang out when Maria told a funny story, the gradual softening of the lines of worry around her eyes. 2 weeks after she had arrived, Xavier took Rebecca on a ride around the property, wanting to show her the full extent of the ranch. She rode well, having learned as a child, and they made their way up to a ridge that overlooked the valley. The view was spectacular, with the ranch spread out below them and the hills rolling away into the distance, and Rebecca sat on her horse in silence for a long moment, just taking it all in. "It is beautiful here," she said finally. "I can see why you love it." "It is home," Xavier agreed. "I cannot imagine living anywhere else." He hesitated, then added, "I hope you are beginning to feel at home here too." Rebecca turned to look at him, and there was something in her eyes that made his heart beat faster. "I am," she admitted, "more than I ever expected to. You and Maria have been so wonderful, and this place, it feels like the first real home I have had since I lost my parents. That probably sounds silly, given that I have only been here 2 weeks. "It does not sound silly at all," Xavier said, guiding his horse closer to hers. "Home is not about how long you have been somewhere. It is about where you feel safe and valued." He wanted to tell her that she could stay forever if she wanted, that he was falling in love with her and could not imagine his life without her anymore, but he held back, knowing it was still too soon. They rode back to the ranch in companionable silence, but something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that were growing stronger with each passing day. That evening, after Maria had retired for the night, Xavier and Rebecca sat on the porch watching the stars come out, the warm September night, wrapping around them like a blanket. "I have been thinking about what I should do next," Rebecca said suddenly. "I cannot stay here forever, living on your charity. I need to figure out how to support myself, how to build a real life." Xavier felt a stab of panic at the thought of her leaving, but he kept his voice calm when he replied. "What do you want to do?" "I thought I might be able to set myself up as a seamstress here in Stockton," Rebecca said slowly. "I am good at it, and from what Maria tells me, there is not anyone in town who does detailed work. I could take commissions, maybe eventually open a small shop, but I would need money to get started, to buy fabric and supplies, and I do not have anything." "What if I helped you?" Xavier offered. "Not charity," he added quickly when he saw her start to protest. "An investment in a business. You could pay me back once you are established." It was a risk, putting the offer out there, because he knew it might make her feel obligated to him in ways he did not want. But he could not stand the thought of her leaving because she felt she had no other options. Rebecca looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable in the starlight. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "You have already done so much for me." "Because I believe in you," Xavier said simply. "Because I have seen how hard you work, how talented you are, and because I want to see you succeed and be happy." He took a deep breath, deciding to risk being more honest. "And because I have come to care about you a great deal, Rebecca. These past 2 weeks, having you here, getting to know you, it has meant more to me than I think you realize." He heard her breath catch, saw her eyes widen in the darkness. "Xavier," she whispered, and there was so much emotion in his name that he felt his chest tighten. "I care about you too. I have been trying not to because everything with Thomas was such a disaster, and I did not trust my own judgment anymore. But I cannot help how I feel when I'm around you. You make me feel safe and valued, and like I could actually have the kind of life I always dreamed about. Xavier reached out and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. You can have that life, he said. Whatever you want, whatever makes you happy, I want to help you achieve it. And if someday you might want that life to include me, well, I would be the luckiest man alive. Rebecca laughed softly, a sound of wonder and joy. I think I already want that, she admitted. Is that crazy? I have only known you 2 weeks, and I swore I would never trust a man again after Thomas, but everything about you is different. You have never asked for anything from me, never made me feel like I owed you, or like your kindness came with strings attached. You just give, and I do not know what I did to deserve finding someone like you. You did not have to do anything, Xavier said, raising their joined hands to his lips and kissing her knuckles gently. You are worth caring for, just as you are. He could feel her trembling, and he released her hand to cup her face instead, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. I know we should probably take things slow, give you more time to heal and be sure of your feelings, but I need you to know that I am falling in love with you, Rebecca Anderson. I think I started falling that first night when you were crying in the rain, and you still found the courage to take my hand and trust a stranger. I love you too, Rebecca whispered, and then she was leaning in, and their lips met in a kiss that was soft and sweet and full of promise. Xavier wrapped his arms around her, holding her close, but being careful not to hold too tight, wanting her to always feel like she could pull away if she wanted. But she melted into him instead, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, and Xavier felt something click into place in his soul, as if he had been waiting his whole life for this moment. They stayed on the porch for hours, talking and kissing and making plans for the future. Rebecca agreed to let Xavier invest in her seamstress business, and they discussed finding her a small shop space in town where she could work and meet with clients. Xavier suggested that she could continue living at the ranch while she got established, and then, with a hesitation that made Rebecca smile, he suggested that maybe she might want to just stay at the ranch permanently as his wife. Are you proposing to me, Xavier Dalton? Rebecca asked, her eyes sparkling with happiness. Not officially, Xavier said, grinning. When I propose, it will be properly done with a ring and everything you deserve. But I am letting you know my intentions, that this is not just a passing feeling for me. I want to build a life with you, Rebecca. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want to work this ranch with you by my side and maybe someday raise a family here. I know it is fast, but when something is right, it is right. And you are the rightest thing that has ever happened to me. Rebecca was crying again, but these were happy tears, tears of joy and relief and hope. Yes, she said, yes to all of it, to building a life together and making this ranch a home and someday having a family. I want all of that with you. She kissed him again, pouring all of her feelings into it, and Xavier held her close, silently thanking whatever force of the universe had led him down that street in the rain 2 weeks ago. The next morning, Xavier and Rebecca rode into Stockton together to look at potential shop spaces. Word had already spread about the young woman staying at the Dalton Ranch, and they received a few curious looks, but Xavier kept his head high and his hand on the small of Rebecca's back, making it clear to anyone watching that she was under his protection. They found a perfect space on Main Street, a small storefront with good light and enough room for Rebecca to work and display samples of her creations. The landlord, a friendly man named Mr. Peterson, was happy to rent to Rebecca, especially when Xavier vouched for her character and skill. They arranged for her to move in at the start of October, giving her 2 weeks to prepare and gather supplies. Xavier took Rebecca to the general store next, where they ordered bolts of fabric, thread, needles, and all the other supplies she would need to start her business. Rebecca kept protesting the expense, but Xavier waved off her concerns, reminding her that this was an investment that she would pay back once she was successful. As they were leaving the general store, a man stepped in front of them, blocking their path. Xavier recognized Thomas Garrett from the sheriff's description, a tall man in his 40s with slicked back hair and calculating eyes. Rebecca went rigid beside Xavier, her hand gripping his arm tightly. "Rebecca," Thomas said, his voice smooth but with an undercurrent of anger. "I have been looking for you. You left without giving notice, and you still owe me money for room and board." She owes you nothing, Xavier said firmly, stepping slightly in front of Rebecca. And you are not to contact her or come near her again. The sheriff has already been informed of your treatment of her. Thomas's eyes narrowed as he looked Xavier up and down, clearly trying to assess whether he was a threat. This is between me and Rebecca, he said. She entered into an agreement with me, and she needs to honor it. The agreement you described to her was fraudulent, Xavier countered, his voice hard. You lied about what kind of work you were expecting her to do, and when she refused to go along with your scheme, you assaulted her. If you continue to harass her, I will personally make sure the sheriff knows every detail of your operation and how you lure young women here under false pretenses. For a moment, Thomas looked like he might argue further, but then he seemed to think better of it. He looked at Rebecca with cold eyes. You will regret this, he said. You think you have found yourself a protector, but men like him always expect something in return. You will learn. You do not know anything about Xavier, Rebecca said, finding her voice. He is a better man than you could ever hope to be. Now leave us alone. Her voice shook slightly, but she stood tall, and Xavier felt a surge of pride at her courage. Thomas opened his mouth to say something else, but Xavier took a step forward, his hand resting on the gun at his hip, and Thomas clearly decided that continuing the confrontation was not worth it. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd on the street. Are you all right? Xavier asked, turning to Rebecca and taking her hands in his. I am fine, Rebecca said, though she was shaking. Thank you for standing up for me. I was so afraid when I saw him, but having you there made all the difference. He is not going to bother you again, Xavier promised, and if he tries, he will have me to answer to. They finished their errands and rode back to the ranch, both of them quieter than they had been on the ride-in. Xavier was angry that Thomas had approached them, angry at the fear he had seen flash through Rebecca's eyes, and he made a mental note to have another conversation with the sheriff to make sure Thomas understood the consequences of further harassment. Over the next 2 weeks, Rebecca threw herself into preparing for the opening of her shop. She spent her days sewing sample pieces to display, beautiful dresses and blouses and quilts that showcased her skill. Xavier had a sign made for the shop, elegant lettering that read, Anderson Seamstress and Fine Sewing, and Rebecca cried when she saw it, overwhelmed by the reality that she was actually going to have her own business. Maria helped Rebecca set up the shop, arranging the fabric bolts and samples in an appealing way, and on the first day of October, they opened the doors for business. Xavier took the day off from ranch work to be there, wanting to support Rebecca on this important day. The shop had a steady stream of visitors, women curious about the new seamstress in town and interested in commissioning work. By the end of the day, Rebecca had taken orders for 3 dresses, 2 quilts, and several minor alterations, and she was glowing with happiness and pride. I cannot believe this is really happening, she said to Xavier as they locked up the shop that evening. A month ago, I was crying in the rain with nothing, and now I have a business and a home and you. It feels like a dream. It is not a dream, Xavier said, pulling her into his arms. It is your life, the life you have earned through your talent and hard work. I am just grateful I get to be a part of it. He kissed her softly, not caring that they were standing on Main Street where anyone could see. He wanted the whole town to know that Rebecca Anderson was his, that she was loved and valued and not to be trifled with. They fell into a new rhythm over the following weeks, with Rebecca spending her days at the shop and her evenings at the ranch with Xavier and Maria. Business was good, better than any of them had expected, and Rebecca was soon working long hours to keep up with the demand. Xavier worried that she was pushing herself too hard, but she seemed to thrive on the work, proud of what she was building. One evening in late October, Xavier finally made good on his promise to propose properly. He took Rebecca back up to the ridge overlooking the ranch, timing it so they arrived just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. He helped her down from her horse and led her to the edge of the ridge, wrapping his arms around her from behind, as they watched the sunset together. Rebecca, he said softly, turning her to face him, these past 2 months have been the happiest of my life. You have brought light and love and laughter into my home, and I cannot imagine my future without you in it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond that had belonged to his grandmother. I know we have only known each other a short time, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Will you marry me, Rebecca Anderson? Will you be my wife and my partner and the mother of my children? Will you help me turn this ranch into a home filled with love and joy?" Rebecca was crying, her hands covering her mouth as she looked at the ring and then up at Xavier's face. "Yes," she said through her tears. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you so much, Xavier. You saved my life in every way that matters, and I want to spend the rest of my days showing you how grateful I am that you stopped that night in the rain." Xavier slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. He kissed her then, a deep, passionate kiss that conveyed all the love and desire and commitment he felt, and Rebecca responded with equal fervor, her arms wrapping around his neck as she pressed herself against him. They stayed on the ridge until the stars came out, talking about wedding plans and their future together, both of them filled with joy and anticipation for the life they were going to build. They decided on a small wedding to be held in early November, just family, friends, and close neighbors. Rebecca worked on making her own wedding dress, a beautiful creation of white lace and satin that made her look like an angel when Xavier saw her walking down the aisle of the small church in Stockton. Maria cried through the entire ceremony, happy tears for the young man she had helped raise and the wonderful woman he had found. The preacher spoke about love and commitment and partnership. And when Xavier and Rebecca exchanged their vows, there was not a dry eye in the church. "I, Xavier Dalton, take you, Rebecca Anderson, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Xavier said, his voice strong and clear. "I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you for all the days of my life. I promise to be your partner in all things, to support your dreams and hold you when times are hard. I promise to build a home with you filled with love and laughter, and to never take for granted the gift of your presence in my life. I, Rebecca Anderson, take you, Xavier Dalton, to be my lawfully wedded husband," Rebecca said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you for all the days of my life. I promise to be your partner in all things, to stand by your side through joy and sorrow. I promise to help you build a home filled with love, and to never forget that you saved me when I had nowhere to go and gave me everything I never dared to dream I could have." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed Rebecca with all the love in his heart, and the small gathering erupted in applause and cheers. They celebrated with a reception at the ranch, where Maria had outdone herself preparing food and decorating the house with flowers and ribbons. Xavier and Rebecca danced together in the parlor, lost in each other's eyes, already counting down the minutes until they could be alone. That night, Xavier carried Rebecca over the threshold of what was now their shared bedroom, setting her down gently and taking a moment just to look at her in her wedding dress, memorizing every detail of this perfect day. "Hello, Mrs. Dalton," he said softly, and Rebecca smiled, a brilliant, joyful smile that took his breath away. "Hello, husband," she replied, reaching up to cup his face. "Thank you for choosing me, for loving me, for giving me this beautiful life." "Thank you for trusting me," Xavier said, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Thank you for taking a chance on a stranger in the rain." Their wedding night was everything it should be, tender and passionate and full of love. Xavier was gentle with Rebecca, making sure she felt cherished and safe, and Rebecca responded with a passion that surprised and delighted them both. They made love slowly, learning each other's bodies, and afterward they lay tangled together, talking softly about their hopes and dreams for the future. The first year of their marriage was filled with joy and hard work. Rebecca continued to run her shop, which was thriving, and Xavier managed the ranch, expanding the herd and making improvements to the property. They worked hard during the days and came together in the evenings, sharing meals and conversations and falling more deeply in love with each passing week. Maria watched over them both with pride and affection, happy to see the home filled with love again. In the spring of 1879, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant. She told Xavier one evening after dinner, her eyes shining with happiness and a touch of nervousness. "I am going to have a baby," she said simply. "We are going to be parents." Xavier let out a whoop of joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down. "We are going to have a baby," he repeated, the wonder of it settling over him. "Rebecca, this is the most amazing news. Are you happy? Are you scared? How are you feeling?" I am all of those things, Rebecca admitted, happy and scared and overwhelmed and excited. But mostly I am just grateful that our child will have you as a father and will grow up in a home filled with love. That is all I ever wanted. They prepared for the baby together, with Xavier building a beautiful cradle and Rebecca sewing tiny clothes and blankets. Maria was beside herself with excitement, already planning to be the best surrogate grandmother any child could hope for. The months passed quickly, and in October of 1879, exactly 1 year after Rebecca had opened her shop, and 2 weeks before their first wedding anniversary, Rebecca gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Alexander Xavier Dalton, and from the moment Xavier held his son in his arms, he knew that his life was complete in ways he had never imagined possible. Alexander had Rebecca's dark hair and Xavier's blue eyes, and he was the most beautiful thing either of them had ever seen. Rebecca recovered well from the birth, and she divided her time between caring for Alexander and running her shop, with Maria helping with the baby when Rebecca needed to work. The years that followed were busy and happy. Alexander grew into a bright, curious boy who loved the ranch and followed his father everywhere. Rebecca's business continued to thrive, and she eventually hired an assistant to help with the workload. Xavier expanded the ranch further, becoming one of the most successful cattlemen in the region. They added to their family as well, with a daughter, Sarah, born in 1881, and another son, Matthew, born in 1883. Xavier would sometimes think back to that rainy night in September of 1878 when he had found Rebecca crying outside the general store, and he would marvel at how one decision, one moment of compassion, had led to this beautiful full life. He had given Rebecca a room when she had nowhere to go, but she had given him so much more in return. She had given him love and partnership and a family. She had turned his house into a home and filled his days with joy and purpose. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1889, Xavier and Rebecca rode back up to the ridge where he had proposed, leaving the children with Maria for the evening. They sat together watching the sunset, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting on his chest, comfortable in the silence that came from years of loving partnership. "Do you ever regret it?" Rebecca asked suddenly. "Taking me in that night? Your life would have been much simpler without me." Xavier pulled back to look at her, incredulous. "Regret it? Rebecca, you were the best thing that ever happened to me. That night was the beginning of everything good in my life. I thank God every day that I was riding through town during that storm, that I saw you and had the sense to stop. You did not complicate my life. You completed it." Rebecca smiled and kissed him softly. "I love you, Xavier Dalton. Thank you for bringing me home." "I love you too, Rebecca Dalton. Thank you for staying." They stayed on the ridge until the stars came out. Just as they had on the night he had proposed 10 years earlier, both of them grateful for the journey that had brought them together, and excited for all the years still to come. Below them, the ranch spread out in the gathering darkness, lights beginning to appear in the windows of the house where their children were probably fighting bedtime, and Maria was probably telling them stories about their parents. The years continued to pass, bringing both challenges and joys as all lives do. There were hard winters and dry summers, cattle lost to disease, and crops that failed, but through it all, Xavier and Rebecca faced everything together, their love providing a foundation that could weather any storm. Their children grew up strong and happy, learning the value of hard work and compassion from their parents' example. Alexander, their eldest, showed an early aptitude for ranching and a deep love for the land, and Xavier began teaching him the business from a young age, knowing that one day his son would take over the Dalton Ranch. Sarah inherited her mother's talent for sewing and design, and as she got older, she began helping in Rebecca's shop, which had expanded into a larger space and now employed 3 seamstresses. Matthew was the quiet one, bookish like Xavier's mother had been, with a particular interest in the law. Xavier and Rebecca supported all of their children's interests, wanting them to have the freedom to pursue their own paths while knowing they always had a home to return to. In 1895, when Alexander was 16 and beginning to take on more responsibility at the ranch, tragedy struck when a neighboring rancher tried to claim water rights that belonged to the Dalton property. The dispute threatened to turn violent, with the neighbor hiring men to intimidate Xavier and potentially damage his property. Xavier refused to be bullied, but he also did not want to put his family at risk. He went to Sheriff Coleman, who was still serving despite his advancing age, and together they built a legal case that definitively proved the Dalton claim to the water rights. Throughout the dispute, Rebecca was Xavier's rock, providing counsel and support and helping him strategize. She also used her connections in town, built through years of running her business, to gather support from other business owners and ranchers who respected the Dalton family. In the end, the neighboring rancher backed down, realizing he could not win against both the law and public opinion. The incident reinforced to Xavier what he had always known, that he and Rebecca were strongest when they faced challenges together. As their children reached adulthood and began making their own way in the world, Xavier and Rebecca found themselves with more time to focus on each other and on the community they had built their life in. Rebecca became involved in charitable work, particularly helping young women who found themselves in difficult situations, remembering all too well what it had felt like to have nowhere to turn. She and Xavier established a fund to help women start small businesses or gain job training, and they were quietly proud of the lives they were able to change. In 1898, exactly 20 years after that fateful rainy night, Xavier and Rebecca celebrated their 19th wedding anniversary with a party attended by what seemed like half of Stockton. Alexander brought his new wife, Emily, a smart young woman from Sacramento who had fallen in love with both Alexander and ranch life. Sarah had just completed her training in San Francisco and was planning to take over Rebecca's shop entirely, allowing Rebecca to finally slow down a bit. Matthew was preparing to leave for law school in the fall, eager to make his own mark on the world. As Xavier looked around at the gathered friends and family, at his children and their futures stretching out bright and full of promise, at his wife who was still as beautiful to him at 40 as she had been at 20, he felt a profound sense of gratitude and peace. He had been given so much more than he had ever dreamed possible, and it had all started with a simple choice to stop and help someone in need. Later that evening, after the party had wound down and the guests had gone home, Xavier and Rebecca walked through the quiet house, picking up stray glasses and plates, comfortable in the familiar routine of cleaning up together. They ended up on the front porch, sitting together on the swing that Xavier had built years ago, watching the stars and listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. 20 years, Rebecca mused. It feels like no time at all and like forever, both at once. I know exactly what you mean, Xavier said, pulling her closer. I still remember every detail of that night. How scared you looked, how brave you were to take my hand and trust me. How right it felt even then to bring you home. You gave me more than a room that night, Rebecca said softly. You gave me hope and safety and love. You gave me a life beyond anything I had ever imagined possible. I was crying in the rain with nowhere to go, and you brought me home. You gave me everything. You gave me just as much, Xavier insisted. You turned my house into a home. You gave me a family and a purpose and a love that has sustained me through everything. We saved each other that night, Rebecca. We just did not know it yet. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in memories and grateful for the present. Finally, Rebecca spoke again, her voice thoughtful. Do you think we made a difference? Beyond our own family, I mean. Do you think we left the world a little better than we found it? Xavier considered the question seriously. He thought about the women Rebecca had helped through her charitable work, the young men he had mentored in ranching, the fair wages and good treatment they had always provided their employees, the example they had tried to set for their children about compassion and integrity. I think we did, he said finally. Maybe not in grand dramatic ways, but in small, steady ones. We helped where we could. We treated people fairly. We raised children who know the value of kindness. That is not nothing. No, Rebecca agreed, smiling. That is not nothing at all. The years continued to roll forward, bringing the joys and sorrows that come with a long life well lived. In 1902, Maria passed away peacefully in her sleep, and Xavier and Rebecca mourned the woman who had been like a mother to Xavier and a mentor to Rebecca. They buried her in the family plot on the ranch, beneath a tree she had loved, and they made sure to tell their grandchildren stories about the kind housekeeper who had helped shape their family. Alexander and Emily gave them 3 grandchildren, 2 boys and a girl, who loved coming to the ranch and learning about cattle and horses from their grandfather. Sarah married a fellow businessman from Stockton and had twin daughters who showed early signs of inheriting the family talent for sewing and design. Matthew became a successful lawyer in Sacramento and brought home a beautiful wife named Caroline, and together they had a son who was already showing his grandfather's love of books and learning. Xavier and Rebecca grew old together gracefully, their love deepening and maturing with each passing year. They had their share of health scares and losses, as everyone does who lives long enough, but they faced everything hand in hand, drawing strength from each other. Xavier's hair went silver, and lines formed around Rebecca's eyes and mouth. But when he looked at her, he still saw the beautiful young woman crying in the rain, and when she looked at him, she still saw her rescuer and the love of her life. On a warm evening in September of 1920, 42 years after they had first met, Xavier and Rebecca sat together on their porch watching the sunset. They were in their 60s now, both still active but starting to feel the weight of their years. Their children had taken over most of the responsibility for running the ranch and the business, allowing Xavier and Rebecca to enjoy a slower pace of life. 42 years, Xavier said, echoing Rebecca's words from so many years ago. It has been the greatest adventure of my life. Mine too, Rebecca said, squeezing his hand. I still cannot believe that scared, desperate girl who had nowhere to go ended up with all of this. A husband who loves her, children and grandchildren who bring joy every day, a life filled with purpose and meaning. It is more than I ever dreamed possible. You were never just a scared, desperate girl, Xavier said firmly. You were always strong and talented and deserving of love and happiness. I just got lucky enough to be the one who got to give it to you. Rebecca turned to look at him, her blue eyes still bright and full of love despite the years. We both got lucky, she said. We found each other when we both needed finding. We built something beautiful together, and we got to spend a lifetime proving that love, real love, the kind that shows up in the rain and offers a room with no strings attached, that kind of love can change everything. Xavier leaned in and kissed her softly, a kiss that held 42 years of love and commitment and partnership. I would do it all again, he said. Every moment, every challenge, every joy. I would choose you every single time. And I would take your hand every single time, Rebecca replied. No matter how scared I was, no matter how uncertain the future looked, I would always choose to trust you, to love you, to build this life with you. They sat together as the stars came out, just as they had done countless times over the years, comfortable in the silence and in each other's presence. The ranch was quiet around them, settling in for the night, and somewhere in the distance they could hear their grandchildren playing, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. The years had brought changes, as years always do. The Wild West of their youth had given way to a more settled, civilized California. Stockton had grown from a rough frontier town into a proper city with paved streets and electric lights. The ranch had expanded and modernized, incorporating new techniques and technologies. But through all the changes, some things had remained constant. The land they loved, the family they had built, and the love that had started on a rainy night in September of 1878 when a cowboy had stopped to help a crying woman and changed both of their lives forever. As they finally made their way inside for the night, Xavier took one last look at the ranch spread out in the moonlight, at the home they had built together, at the legacy they would leave behind. He thought about that young man he had been, riding through the rain and making a split-second decision to stop and help a stranger. He thought about how easily he could have ridden past, how different both of their lives would have been if he had. But he had not ridden past. He had stopped, and he had offered his hand, and Rebecca had taken it. And from that simple act of compassion had grown a love story that had spanned more than 4 decades, a family that would continue for generations, and a life that had been richer and fuller than either of them could have imagined. In the spring of 1925, Xavier and Rebecca celebrated their 43rd wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. It was a joyous occasion, filled with laughter and stories and the warmth of family. Xavier stood to give a toast, his voice still strong despite his years. 43 years ago, I married the love of my life, he said, looking at Rebecca with eyes full of devotion. But our story really began a year before that, on a rainy night when I found her with nowhere to go and brought her home. I thought I was just helping someone in need, but what I was really doing was finding my other half, my partner, my everything. Rebecca, you have made every day of the past 44 years an adventure and a blessing. I love you more today than I did on that rainy night, more than I did on our wedding day, and I will love you until my very last breath." Rebecca was crying happy tears as she stood to respond. "Xavier gave me a room when I had nowhere to go," she said. "But he gave me so much more than that. He gave me a home, a family, a purpose, and a love that has sustained me through everything life has thrown at us. He taught me that there are still good men in the world, men who help without expecting anything in return, men who keep their promises and show up every single day. I am the luckiest woman alive to have been crying in the rain that night, because it led me to him." The family raised their glasses, toasting to love and partnership and the beautiful life that could grow from a single moment of compassion. The celebration continued long into the evening, with music and dancing and stories being shared across the generations. Xavier and Rebecca danced together slowly, not caring that their movements were stiff and careful, just happy to be in each other's arms. As the night wore on and the family began to depart, Alexander pulled his father aside. "Dad," he said seriously, "I want you to know how grateful I am for the example you and Mom set, the way you have loved each other, the way you have built this family and this legacy. It is something I hope to live up to with my own family." Xavier clasped his son's shoulder, pride filling his chest. "You already are living up to it," he said. "You are a good man, Alexander, a good husband and father and rancher. Your mother and I are so proud of you and your siblings. You are our greatest achievement." Similar conversations happened with Sarah and Matthew, each of Xavier and Rebecca's children, taking a moment to express their gratitude and love. By the time the house was finally quiet and Xavier and Rebecca were alone again, they were both exhausted but deeply happy. "That was perfect," Rebecca said as they prepared for bed. "Seeing all of our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, knowing that they are all thriving and happy. We did well, Xavier. We built something that will last." "We did," Xavier agreed, climbing into bed beside her and pulling her close. "And it all started with you trusting me enough to take my hand." "Best decision I ever made," Rebecca murmured, already drifting off to sleep. "Second best," Xavier corrected gently. "The best decision was saying yes when I proposed." Rebecca smiled against his chest. "All right, second best, but they were both pretty good decisions." "The best," Xavier insisted. And those were the last words spoken before they both fell asleep, wrapped in each other's arms as they had been for 43 years. Xavier and Rebecca lived for several more happy years, watching their family continue to grow and thrive. They remained active in the community and on the ranch as long as their health allowed, never losing their passion for the life they had built together. When they finally passed, within 6 months of each other, in 1929, it was peacefully and surrounded by love, both of them secure in the knowledge that they had lived fully and loved deeply. They were buried side by side on the ranch, beneath 2 oak trees that Xavier had planted the year they were married. Their gravestone was simple, bearing their names and dates and a single line that Rebecca had requested. She had nowhere to go, and he brought her home. It was a fitting epitome for a love story that had begun with compassion and grown into something that had touched countless lives. The Dalton Ranch continued to thrive under Alexander's management, and the seamstress shop remained in the family for 2 more generations. The charitable fund that Xavier and Rebecca had established continued to help women in need, a living testament to Rebecca's belief that everyone deserved a second chance, and Xavier's conviction that those with abundance had an obligation to help those without. Their story became something of a legend in Stockton, told and retold by their descendants and by the many people whose lives they had touched. It became a reminder that simple acts of kindness can change lives, that love can grow from the most unexpected circumstances, and that when you open your heart and your home to someone in need, you might just be opening the door to your own happiness. The legacy of that rainy September night in 1878 lived on long after Xavier and Rebecca were gone, in the family they had created, in the business they had built, in the lives they had changed, and in the enduring proof that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is take a stranger's hand when you have nowhere else to turn, and sometimes the most important thing you can do is offer that hand in the first place. Their great-great-grandchildren would eventually run the ranch in the modern era, but they never forgot the story of their ancestors, the cowboy who stopped in the rain, and the woman who was brave enough to trust him. They kept the original house as a family museum of sorts, preserving the room where Rebecca had stayed that first night, the porch where Xavier had proposed, the kitchen where Maria had presided for so many years. They made sure that every new generation knew the story, understood the values that Xavier and Rebecca had lived by, and carried forward the commitment to compassion and community that had defined their lives. And sometimes, on rainy September evenings, family members would swear they could feel the presence of Xavier and Rebecca on the ranch, a sense of enduring love and partnership that had soaked into the very soil of the place. They would think about that young woman crying in the rain with nowhere to go, and the cowboy who had brought her home and given her a room, and they would be grateful for the love story that had started it all, the love story that had created everything they held dear. It was a reminder that everyone has the power to change a life, that kindness matters, that love is real and worth fighting for, and that sometimes the most important decisions we make are the ones we make in an instant, driven by compassion rather than calculation. Xavier and Rebecca's story proved that true love does exist, that it can grow from the smallest seed of kindness, and that when two people commit to building a life together based on respect, partnership, and genuine affection, they can create something that lasts not just for their lifetime, but for generations to come. The rain had brought them together, but it was their choice to stay together, to work together, to love together. That had created the legacy. And in the end, that was the real story. Not just that Xavier had helped Rebecca when she needed it, but that they had both chosen each other every single day for the rest of their lives, through challenges and triumphs, through ordinary days and extraordinary moments, always remembering that they were each other's home, each other's safe harbor, each other's greatest blessing.